serious legal trouble for two of President Trump's former top associates, Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry is here with the details. Ed, what's the latest?
Jason, great to see a difficult day for the president on two fronts. As you mentioned, Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. The Cohen case could prove to be more damaging legally and politically because the president was directly implicated in the plea deal, a far cry from the Manafort matter, which has nothing to do with the president, the 2016 campaign, or allegations of Russian collusion. The former Trump campaign chair was stone-faced in a Virginia court as he learned the jury found he's guilty on 5 counts of filing false income tax returns, 1 count of failing to file a report of a foreign bank account, 2 more charges of bank fraud. The jury could not reach a verdict in Manafort's case on 10 other counts. Prosecutors have until the end of the month to decide whether they'll seek a retrial on that. Manafort also facing a second trial in Washington on charges of lobbying fraud and other matters. That comes in the fall. There's also the possibility Manafort will be pardoned by the president, who declared today before his rally in West Virginia that the special counsel investigation is simply out of control. Watch.
This is a witch hunt and it's a disgrace. But this has nothing to do what they started out looking for Russians involved in our campaign. There were none. I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. Again, he worked for Bob Dole. He worked for Ronald Reagan. He worked for many, many people. And this is the way it ends up. And it was not the original mission, believe me. It was something very much different. So had nothing to do with Russian collusion. We continue the witch hunt.
Now, significant, the president did not say anything about the Cohen case, leaving it to his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to provide this statement. Quote, there is no allegation of any wrongdoing against the president and the government's charges against Mr. Cohen. It is clear that, as the prosecutor noted, Mr. Cohen's actions reflect a pattern of lies and dishonesty over a significant period of time. But Cohen's plea deal alleges he broke the law to influence the 2016 election on behalf of an unnamed candidate who clearly is the president. Cohen will get somewhere between 43 and 63 months in prison after pleading guilty to the campaign finance charges I mentioned, plus bank fraud and tax evasion. The campaign charges involve payments to 2 women who alleged affairs with the president that he's vehemently denied, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. And Cohen's plea deal seems to directly contradict something that Giuliani told Fox back in May. Watch this.
Having something to do with paying some Stormy Daniels woman $130,000, I mean, which is going to turn out to be perfectly legal. That money was not campaign money. Sorry, I'm giving you a fact now that you don't know. It's not campaign money. No campaign finance violation. So
they funneled it through the law firm.
Funneled through a law firm, and the president repaid it.
Well, that at least raises the question now about whether there's any legal jeopardy for the president or anyone else in the campaign. Plus, Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, always very aggressive in reaching out to the media. He's now claiming this plea allows him to get the stay lifted in the civil case that's separate from this, meaning there will be a new fight over whether the president has to give a deposition. Avenatti tweeting to Giuliani, quote, buckle up, buttercup, as if this fight is just beginning, Jason.
Ed, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's bring on our legal panel to break down today's developments. Harmeet Dillon is a Republican and a lawyer. Vinoo Varghese is a criminal defense attorney. And Tom Dupree, who was a deputy assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration. I thank you all for being here. We want to try to break down today's developments, and I want to just do it one at a time. So let's talk just first, we'll go around the horn, on Paul Manafort. And Harmeet, I'd like to give you the first stab at this. What's your take on the developments today?
Well, the developments today are, I think, very unfortunate for Mr. Manafort because he is close to the president at one point in time for a brief period of time. He got caught in the crosshairs of the prosecution and the Mueller investigation. As we can see from both the indictment as well as the charges and the ultimate jury verdict today, we don't see anything about the president, about Russian collusion, or anything other than irregularities in his taxes and statements to banks. Now, those are serious issues, and unfortunately, Mr. Manafort now will probably spend a good decade plus to the rest of his life in prison, depending on what happens next. But it's got zero to do with the president, and it just frankly underscores that but for his closeness to the president, he probably wouldn't have been prosecuted. So it's part of the narrative of unfair witch hunt here.
Now, Vinoo, who's joining me here in the studio in New York, is she right? Harmeet makes a good point. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump and the proximity of the president is really what's driving this, isn't it?
Well, look, I think the first thing that you should note is that ostriches and pythons all across the country will sleep well tonight knowing that Paul Manafort will remain behind bars. Understand that this is a big victory for Team Mueller in the court of public opinion because they won this case in the court. There have been a number of guilty pleas here.
But it's a case that has nothing to do with the original Manafort directive.
This is Trump's campaign chairman, was his campaign chairman.
Are you going to, like everybody that's ever worked for you, are you going to live up?
Paul Manafort here has been found guilty. Look, his team took a gamble.
Something that he did a long time ago.
His team took a gamble and tried this case in Alexandria, Virginia, hoping for a much more conservative jury than in Washington, D.C.
Do you really believe that he would have been prosecuted except for his proximity to Donald Trump?
Obviously, they looked at him. That was part of it. No, I agree. His proximity to Donald Trump brought this case. And that doesn't mean this is the only thing.
And look, if somebody has skirted the tax laws, I want them to be convicted. But to have the national spotlight on him just because he's worked for like 100 days for Donald Trump seems a bit over the top. But let me get Tom's take on this. Tom, what do you think is happening here with Paul Manafort?
Well, a few things here, Jason. For one thing, I do think he was the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, look, the fact that Bob Mueller is poking around, Mueller has a broad mandate. He has the authority to investigate any crimes he uncovers in the course of investigating Russia collusion. Unfortunately for Manafort, put the spotlight on him. I think as far as the president goes, I think there is no legal jeopardy to the president from today's verdict. As we all know, this involves things that are not connected to Manafort's work on the campaign or to Manafort's service to Donald Trump. I think at most the president is guilty of making a very poor personnel decision when he chose Manafort to be his campaign chairman.
But the reason that the president picked Manafort, I mean, that can be debated, but the question about whether there's a reason why the special counsel, right, decided to push this off for a different prosecutor rather than holding it for himself. Correct, Tom?
Well, the Manafort, remember, was tried by the special counsel's team, so I think this part of the case, Mueller is kind of keeping close to heart. Now, look, I agree with you that if Manafort
But why are they doing that? I guess the point I should make, worded better, was why do that? Is he now putting the squeeze on Mr. Manafort, saying, hey, look, I made my case. You're going to be convicted here. You've been convicted, and now I'm going to put the squeeze on you. You better cough something up on Donald Trump, or I'm going to actually... Is that where this is going?
Jason, I bet you that Mueller and Mueller's team have been putting the squeeze on Manafort for many, many months now, and he hasn't caved. I suppose the pressure will continue, although at this point, obviously, Manafort has lost a lot of the leverage that he had at the outset, given that he now stands criminally convicted. That said, it's possible that at some point they'll reach a deal. As we know, Manafort has another trial coming up in a few months, so there might be an opportunity to do some wheeling and dealing, although I tend to think if Manafort had something of value to give to Mueller and he was willing to turn it over to Mueller, you'd think Mueller would have it by now.
All right, let's talk about Michael Cohen, because that is a different scenario. And Vinoo, I want to give you the first shot at that. How do you read that situation?
Well, the first thing, I actually think this is a big political victory for the Republicans today, with announcing that Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's personal attorney, paid hush money to a porn star and a Playboy model. There's no debate that President Trump has better taste in women than Bill Clinton. He's an attorney. This is a guy who's committed a crime, multiple crimes, tax evasion, violations of campaign finance laws. He's going to be automatically disbarred. The question is, how much time is he going to face behind bars? The deal says 43 to 63 months, but that judge can give much more than that. That's a reality of the case. So for him, it leaves open the possibility of cooperating. There's still an opportunity to cooperate. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that December date is pushed back.
Harmeet, how do you read this situation? And I think it's pretty interesting who Michael Cohen picked as his attorney, because Lanny Davis is obviously no friend of Donald Trump, but very close in proximity to Hillary Clinton.
Well, a couple of things to keep in mind about Michael Cohen. I mean, you know, he's a guy who tapes his clients, and he's a guy who a few months ago, when he was looking at potentially 60 years in prison for these potential charges, at that point he was saying the president had nothing to do with any of this stuff, and, you know, there's no campaign finance issue. Fast forward to today when, you know, you're facing 60 years in prison, and the alternative is potentially 5 years in prison, and you can get that 5-year deal if you say that a couple of things that aren't crimes are crimes and pin them on the president. So I think that the overwhelming power of the prosecutors here in these situations, in every situation where it's a federal prosecution, has led to this result. And Lanny Davis has really sold his client out, because I think it is a real stretch, and I'm a lawyer who does election law, campaign finance. It is a real stretch to say that somebody who deals with paying off hush money to a blackmailer is necessarily trying to affect the outcome of an election. I suspect that throughout his career, Donald Trump has been approached by women like this who have, shaken him down, and this is a standard way that people are paid off. And so, I don't see the campaign finance violation here at all. And so, it's really unfortunate that he was forced into this situation and has done this. But, again, A, nothing to do with collusion or Russia, and B, no crime here for the president.
Jonathan Turley, a noted attorney, was on Fox News earlier. Let's listen to him, and then Tom, I'd like to get your reaction to that.
I mean, unless this unidentified candidate is Bernie Sanders, it's going to be bad news. I mean, or you're not paying attention. Because if the prosecutors accept what is in this indictment, then the president just became an unindicted co-conspirator. That's the simple matter of it.
Tom, you've got deep experience with the Department of Justice. Is Jonathan Turley right?
Well, not quite. The way I look at it is, look, for one thing, the fact that Cohen pleaded to a particular charge doesn't mean that other people are automatically deemed guilty. I mean, that's why we have trials. That's why we have evidence. That's why we have juries make these determinations. I will also say that one of the most complex and Byzantine areas in the entire sphere of federal law is the election code. And lawyers will argue to the nth day about whether something constitutes an election violation or it doesn't. And I think this is no different. For me, what this ultimately is going to come down to is whether Cohen has something other than his own word that this is what happened, that these payments were made for the purpose of influencing a campaign, that they were done at the direction of presumably Donald Trump. If Cohen has Trump on tape, if Cohen has evidence to support his allegations, then it could pose greater jeopardy for the president. But right now, all we know is it's just Cohen's word against presumably the president's word.
But there are tapes, and is the Trump team able to hear and listen to all those tapes if they are in the possession of the special prosecutor? Or is that something that they've only maybe heard snippets of?
My guess is the president has not heard everything that's in the possession of the prosecutors. I mean, Lord knows what sorts of things Cohen was taping. There have been some tapes that address some of the subject matter of today's indictment. We don't know if those are all of them, and the tapes that we have heard have been somewhat ambiguous, to say the least.
But, Vinoo, I have a hard time believing that this is the end all. First of all, I haven't heard the word Russia yet, and collusion. You haven't seen anything there regarding Russia and collusion, have you?
That's not what this is. That's not what this is about.
I know,
today.
but this is where the special prosecutor is spending all of his time, about a guy who was, dealing with medallions on taxis.
Well, that's the tax evasion part of it, right? So you have here Donald Trump's personal lawyer, the man who said he would take a bullet for Donald Trump, who's now said in open court that at the direction of the candidate, he funneled this money to influence the election. Right? So the question of Russia collusion, that's a separate question. The fact is,
well, it was the prime question of what the prosecutor is supposed to be going after.
But he has a broad mandate. As he says, he can investigate different things, and all of this came from this. And the fact is, now you have Trump's national security advisor, his former campaign chairman. Which
they delayed, right? They delayed the sentencing, and there's a lot of evidence out there that he was manipulated along the way.
Guilty.
So, Harmeet, last word. How do you read the situation going forward? What happens next?
Well, I mean, obviously the left in this divided country is going to go, crazy like Vinoo just did, imputing guilt by association here. But, this is a tragic tale of a lawyer gone awry in many ways. It's unfortunate for him personally, but the president is very focused on his agenda. He's popular. I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't affect his popularity one bit, because people are beginning to see the results in this country. And yet, after all this money, all this effort, all this drama, all these indictments, all you've got is zero to do with the Russian collusion. The only person who committed campaign finance violations with respect to Russia, with respect to foreign countries, is Hillary Clinton, and she never got indicted. So I think this really underscores for the president's position that this is a witch hunt and it has no legitimacy and needs to end.
Mueller investigation is not over.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Harmeet, gentlemen, thank you. We do appreciate it.